This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Actually, it is afternoon. It's 12:02. This is David Leinberry from Fortinet. I appreciate everybody joining today. I'm here with the folks from APT to present the importance of having an integrated security fabric solution, pretty much end-to-end. A lot of it is centered around a sandbox, and so without further ado, I'm just going to get into those various areas. So, but before I do that, I usually like to talk about and Nicole and Nicole, make sure you can see this next slide, industry information. Can you still see it?
Yep, I can see it here.
Okay, so this is one of the reasons why we talk about the importance of having an end-to-end security fabric well, we'll talk about what's going on in the industry. An estimated $400 billion a year of intellectual property is stolen from corporations, and I've been with Fortinet for 4 years. Before that, I was with Mandiant and FireEye, and before that, some years ago, I was with McAfee. So I've been in the security space for a while. But for those of you, just a simple story for like the first one. For those out there that has an iPhone, the folks that make the glass that goes into the iPhone are based in upstate New York. And about 5 years ago, they decided to build a manufacturing facility in China. Figured they'd save costs in manufacturing. They'd be closer to final assembly point. So about 2 months before the plant's supposedly completed, the COO goes over there to check up on construction and plant operations. And as he gets over there, he's driving the road. He sees that there's smoke coming out of the smokestack, and he's very excited. He goes, "Oh my gosh, we're 2 months ahead of schedule. This is great." And the cab driver goes, "That's not your plant. That's a state-owned plant." And the guy scratches his head. 2 miles down the road is the plant, still 2 months away from completion, still under construction. He goes back and he tells the board what he saw. The board calls the FBI. The FBI said you should do an incident response to see if you've been compromised. They called up my old company, Mandiant. We went in there. We determined that the Chinese had been in there for about 305 days inside their network and had stolen all their intellectual property. It took them 15 years to develop glass that was sensitive to human touch. And not only did they steal all their intellectual property, they also stole the blueprints of the new manufacturing facility they were going to build in China. And the Chinese actually were able to build it faster than this company was. And the long story of it short is I've got hundreds of stories just like that where companies get compromised. They don't go public with it because if the traders and investors find out that their intellectual property has been stolen, their stock value will take a hit. So they just keep quiet, they swallow their pride, they move forward. And that's just one of many areas of issues. Ransomware had about a 300% uptick between 2015 and 2016. It's still a very profitable industry for the bad guys. The FBI report it's about a $5.3 billion a year industry. That and W-2 CEO fraud, which is where you get a bogus email telling you that the CEO says, "I approve you to pay company X, Y, and Z," and you're a finance person or somebody in the treasury, and you send out a check, and then it's too late. The check's already been gone out to the bad guys. And so there's several areas of vulnerability within the arena. The average incursion, we mentioned the first story was about 5 years ago, was about 305 days. It's dropped down to about 186 days, but that's still a long time to have someone in your network. Email phishing and spearing attacks, still the number one reason why people are getting compromised. That number is between 80 to 90%. That's pretty much, you read every 6 months there's a new article coming out that supports that. And then AV detection, if you're depending on your firewall to be your main line of defense, Virus Bulletin put out a report last year, it came out in January of 2017, which showed this is the reporting for antivirus detection from an AV engine back in 2015, the late of 2015. Everybody's around 95%. But here, if you look at 2016, this report came out in January of 2017. Everybody's hovering around 90% detection, and that's the main reason for that is because of all the polymorphic ransomware. Since ransomware exploded and had such a huge effect on the market, it actually weakened the performance and detection rates of antivirus. And so if you're depending on your firewall as being your main line of defense, you're leaving yourself open to probably somewhere between 8 and 9% of vulnerability as far as of getting ransomware, target attacks, CEO fraud. There's a slew of bad players out there and different attack fronts that can come at you. This is the Verizon breach report. When I came to Fortinet, I came on board 4 years ago to help evangelize our Sandbox here. We have one. All of our competitors have one. Customers used to ask, who's a perfect candidate for a Sandbox? And if you look at the Verizon breach report, there isn't really any industry out there immune from getting compromised. Every industry out there is getting hit. This next one, I suppose people can talk if you want. I usually allow or give out prizes when I'm doing this in front of a group. What do you think the average cost of a breach was in 2018 was? And I would usually ask the question. Anybody want to take a guess? Is it A, B, C, D, or E? Any guesses out there?
B.
No. B. Oh my God, you're right. It is actually B. I had the numbers juggled a little bit more differently, so it's tougher to talk. But it is B. But the reality is B is what it cost. The average cost of a data breach was around the globe was $3.86 billion, which is about a 6%, 10% increase from 2016 or 17. The average cost of a data breach in the United States was $8 million in 2017. So it's gone up. We're actually the most lucrative place to get hacked. They said India was one of the lower ones. They were $1.7 million of the industrial 8 nations. E was the average cost. If you're a company that has customer data records, the average cost of a stolen record for a customer is about $148. Now, Equifax lost 123 million records, and they should have been out of business at $148 a record. But they turned around and sold you credit card insurance, and they actually made money on the deal. So, and then D, Target actually had a Sandbox, and they published their loss at $162 million. It was actually more like $440 million, but whatever. It's a couple $1 million between friends. The long story short, it's expensive if you get breached. A lot of times I go ask customers, what do you think, what is important to you as far as protecting? Is it your customer data, system availability, business continuity, intellectual property? Usually they always say all of the above. We'll touch base on business continuity. I was in Buffalo, New York a couple of years ago working one of our trade shows, and I talked with a partner there, and he told me about a small business in Buffalo, about 250 employees, very profitable. They get hit with ransomware. The bad guys wanted $25,000. They hit one of their servers. They were willing to pay it because they were cash flow heavy and very profitable high tech company. They called the FBI. The FBI said, "Do you do backups?" They said, "Yes, we do." And they said, "Well, if you do backups, you should tell the bad guys to go pound sand." So they did just that. But about 5-6 hours later, they were doing their downloads of their backups, and they realized that they hadn't checked their backups in 6 months. And suddenly they realized they had lots of holes in it. So they go, "Oh crap!" So they went back and they paid the $25,000 to the ransomware folks. But by the time that money cleared, about 10 hours had passed. The bad guys said, "Hey, the reason why you're paying us now is because we know your backups don't work, so we want another $25,000." And so they paid him the extra $25,000, but now it took us a lot longer for that to clear. By then, 24 hours had passed. They did get the keys, but it was too late. That the malware had already started deleting files on their servers, and the problem was that their end users couldn't work for the next 3 weeks, and it costed millions of dollars of lost productivity. And so the reality is that relates to the business continuity aspect of it. So the reality is you deal with bad guys, and sometimes they're scrupulous and sometimes they're not. But the reality is you've got to learn a better way to protect yourself, and that kind of centers around a sandbox. And so people may ask, what is a sandbox? A sandbox is basically a secure appliance, whether it be a physical appliance or a virtual machine, where we have a bunch of VMs in that cluster, scanning and detonating a file, acting like a human being. My company has a sandbox, as I mentioned before. Most of our competitors all have a sandbox. We actually put something in there called a Fortitrace. A Fortitrace simulates a mouse being dragged to give it that human look, because 4 or 5 years ago, our FortiGuard labs, our threat research center, realized that the bad guys knew when they were in a sandbox if there was no mouse being dragged and the file was still being detonated. So anyways, what is a sandbox? I'm going to sort of explain. All sandboxes have pretty much what you see in the slide here. So they all have an AV pre-filter. Ours has what we call an extreme database. Anything that we've ever captured in the last 18 years, pretty much all of our competitors have the same thing. That allows us to look at anything that might have fallen off what we call the active database. Active database, which would preside on your firewalls and your mail security and all the other security tools you have in your bag there. the active database is a much smaller file set. If we haven't seen a piece of malware in 2 years, 3 years, our threat research center makes that determination. It falls off the active database, and then that at that point, so it may get by your firewall. But within a Sandbox, we have an extreme database, which will look at this. We also do a cloud query, which goes up to our cloud, to our threat research center, to say, hey, what have you seen in the last 2 minutes or 3 minutes since the last time? I'm going to go back down. Since the last time this AV engine was updated. And so it takes about 2 or 3 seconds for these two signature-based detection solutions within your Sandbox to be act to work. You know, when you talk about your firewalls, you're usually talking milliseconds for scanning. It's a much faster scanning process, whereas a Sandbox usually is in the cloud or it's offline, and it's going to take a little bit longer to detonate a file because you really want to run through it. One thing that the Fortinet group has, we have code emulation. It's a patented piece of technology. It actually looks at code, but it doesn't actually have the ability to detonate a file to look and see if the code's been embedded inside a file set. So it only looks at the code on the outside. So if a file still appears to be clean after these first 3 phases, then we spin up a virtual machine. All Sandboxes have a VM in it. You know, it acts like a human being. It'll spin up a VM and say, you know, what do you want to do? I want to wait 200 days. Well, 200 days has passed. We have a clock inside the Sandbox which accelerates time, and we'll fake out the file and say, hey, 200 days has passed. What do you want to do next? I want to go to this URL. Great, let's go to the URL. We look to see if the URL is new, if it's on a whitelist, if it's an unknown URL. And then we watch to see what it does next, and maybe it does callback detection. You know, brings down data. Like if you do a go-to meeting like you did today, that's a perfect dropper, which could be considered malicious, unless obviously you know all the websites we go to, because it's actually bringing down more data on top of your laptop. And so the Sandbox will look at that, and it usually takes most Sandboxes between 30 to 50 seconds to detonate a file. To see if it's malicious or suspicious, run its analytics against it to see what it's trying to do. Now, if it picks up on the file in these, it would be considered malicious. And then if it picks it up in the Sandbox, we usually call it suspicious. There's 3 phases, low risk, medium risk, high risk. Now, all Sandboxes do the same thing. So let's, for argument point, say, we have one. A lot of our competitors have it. So that's what a Sandbox does. Any questions? Because I think we do have an open mic here. So if you have questions, you can please ask. Any questions, folks? So far, okay. There's a bunch of different types of danger that the Sandbox looks for. This is kind of all of them. Fortinet, who is one of only 2 vendors that publishes their zero-day detection rate, discovered the 40th variant of CryptoLocker in August of 2015. As I mentioned before, that ransomware had an explosion in 2016, and the reason for that was the FBI reported that by the fall of 2015 that the Chinese had gotten into the market. Prior to that, it was just the Eastern Europeans, the Russians, and Ukrainians. But by the fall of 2016, the Chinese got into it, and by middle of 2016, you could see that the cyber heisters reported there was over 100 variants of ransomware, and that number was growing on a daily basis. So that kind of relates to the fact of the explosion of ransomware. The Sandboxes, most Sandboxes can look at protocols. Sometimes certain Sandboxes require that you buy separate Sandboxes to look at different types of protocols. Others allow you to do it all out of a single Sandbox. You can also set policies to look at different file types. I would suggest you turn off, if you get a lot of Flash, turn off Flash, because we haven't seen any malware written in Flash. And also operating systems, since 99% of the malware written out there, 98% of the malware out there written is in Windows code. Our Sandbox at Fortinet ships with Windows Office licensing. But if you do have a lot of Macs and you want to scan on a Mac OS, we do have the ability to do it in the cloud. Some of our competitors do that as well. The reason you have to have a separate hardware and Mac hardware to run to detonate a Mac OS file. So that's just a little FY there. So we have the ability to do that. So the different deployment modes of a Sandbox, this would be if I guess you would call it a non-integrated environment where your Sandbox is in there and it doesn't really integrate with any other competitive products, point solutions, shall we say. If in this particular scenario, I'm going to tell you about the Target story, because Target actually had a FireEye Sandbox and they had a gentleman managing the workflow. What's the workflow mean? if you get an alert, you don't know who's infected because you don't get an IP address with it. So you would then have to look for the log files and then figure out where in your network that file persists. And that's called the workflow. Once you figure that out, then you can verify who's infected in your network and you can go mitigate them. Target bought a FireEye Sandbox in March of 2013, and they had a gentleman managing the workflow. And he left the company in October of 2013, and Target then outsourced the management of that box to India. But India did not do the incident response. That was the responsibility for the folks in Minnesota who managed the SIM for Target. We're going to talk about what a SIM is a little bit later on. On November 4th, the FireEye Sandbox sent up an alert. The guys in India called the guys in Minnesota and said, I got this report. Can you look at it and tell me what it is? It was sent out by the Sandbox, and the guys in Minnesota said, yeah, we'll get to it. And then on November 8th, same thing happened again. They got another alert from the Sandbox, and again they sent it to the guys in Minnesota, and they never actually looked at it. And so 2 weeks later, the FBI called the CEO of Target saying, I'm getting calls from MasterCard, Visa, and American Express, and all arrows point to you. What's going on over there? They then called Verizon to do an instant response. It took Verizon 2 weeks to figure out that they got hacked on port 80 through an HVAC vendor, which is what the Sandbox was trying to tell them weeks earlier. So the point I'm trying to make there is that Sandbox technology, whether you buy a Fortinet or our competitors, is a manual solution. So what you're trying to do is find some automation. And so what I mean by automation is so say, for example, you have a firewall. Hopefully you have a Sandbox from the same company where you can then integrate the Sandbox with the firewall. And that way there's integration. Maybe where the Sandbox sends an update or a hash to that file once it's alerted and deemed infected. You also hope that your Sandbox has integration with your endpoint solution, because if it gets through the firewall and it mirrors a copy of the Sandbox and the Sandbox is not in line, usually that's what happens in your cloud solutions. You have to wait maybe a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Cloud solutions have sometimes a lag time, a latency, because it's a shared resource and there's multiple vendor people sending files up to it. So the Sandbox will get back to you as soon as it can, usually 5-10 minutes. There's really no vendor that will give you a guarantee. Fortinet has an on-prem solution where we don't guarantee, but we can size it effectively and we can test it out during proof of concepts. And you can do that hopefully with some of our other competitors. So you're hoping that the Sandbox will then have integration to your endpoint. Maybe it will quarantine the file on the endpoint. Maybe you can take that endpoint off manually. Maybe you have a NAC out there that will network access control solution that will then set policies at the network to then disengage that endpoint from a switch or a router or what have you. So these are all things Fortinet has, but some of our competitors have bits and pieces of it. None of them have the whole end-to-end solution. They may have the firewall, they may have the mail solution, but they don't have the client, or vice versa. Also, the big important factor is having a mail solution that integrates with your Sandbox. And because 80 or 90% of your malware comes in through mail because someone's credentials get compromised, as we mentioned before, and because mail is not real time, sometimes you can have a Sandbox in line with your mail where it proactively blocks the threats before it actually gets to the end user. And that's the key, to have a Sandbox and a mail solution that integrate, where it's automated. You could be home sleeping in bed, 2 o'clock in the morning, one of your end users, gets a file from some bad player overseas, and it gets quarantined or blocked at the mail level. And so in the morning when you come in with your cup of coffee at 8 o'clock to see what's been queued up the night before, now you're seeing that actually this was the first one was a false positive. You let it through, hey, that's fine. Or the next one was a targeted attack. I'll tell you what a target attack is. We were doing a proof of concept for a customer in New Jersey. They made the active ingredients for baking soda and baking powder. Not a real sexy product, but they've been around for over 100 years. They were just shy of a billion-dollar corporation, and they had several patents, over I think 25, 30 patents. And we were doing a proof of concept, a free trial, where they were testing our Sandbox. They actually had our firewall. They had our mail solution. And we had caught malware that both of those two solutions had missed, but the CIO didn't feel it was anything worth losing sleep over. He couldn't see the value in the investment. The last day we were deciding to pull the box out of it because they just weren't going to move forward. We discovered 4 target attacks. It was the Chinese coming to try and hack in there. And my engineer that was doing the evaluation and assisting and explaining what was going on, recognized the Chinese players. He said it was the Chinese Army. It was the Unit 235 or something like that. He mentioned some business unit. He had seen it a lot when he was in the Marine Corps. Anyways, telling the CIO that he kind of alluded like, that's fine. You guys will catch this somewhere else. Your lab, your FortiGuard labs will send an update. My firewalls will block it tomorrow. And there was silence on the phone, and I said, no, 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 this was a target attack. They used your logo on one of your invoices. This wasn't meant for anybody else but you. This is what we call a unique target attack. They're trying to get in and steal your patents. I said, do you do any business in Asia? He goes, oh yeah. I said, all right. Once the Chinese get your patents, there and anywhere else in the world that doesn't recognize U.S. patent law, which is half the planet Earth, will start to buy their products from China because they'll undercut your price by 30, 40, 50, who knows how much, and they're going to go after that market. And so right now, you're at $850 million a year revenue stream. Sure, I'll pull the box today, and in a couple of days, the Chinese will be back. They'll hack into your system. They'll steal your patents, and your revenue stream will go probably from about $850 million a year down to maybe 400 in about 12 to 18 months. So sure, I'll pull the box. And so he said, don't touch it. I got to go to the board now. And we ended up selling it to him, and we actually caught 16 more of these target attacks over the next month or so. So the reality is I was excited just to, have the proof that we could, sell the box. And there's been many instances where we've helped clean up ransomware attacks where customers didn't have any Fortinet. They called us up because we had presented to them a few months before, and they get hit with ransomware. We bring our solution in as a free proof of concept, and we clean up the mess. It takes about a day and a half with our Fortinet Sandbox and our Fortinet solution. We clean it up, and we block future attacks. And that's just, a few of the stories I have of 100 instances where we've done proof of concepts, after the fact, before the fact, catching, 0 days, ransomware, and what have you. So, any questions so far? Okay. Someone about to say something? No? Question? Okay. We also support multiple egress points. What's an egress point? Well, if you have multiple locations and you have firewalls at those locations, and you split that firewall, allowing internet access at the remote location, that's considered an egress point. If you have a spoken hub network where all of those remote locations have to feed back to a central data center, and then forward that file request to the internet, then that's called a spoken hub network. But if you allow internet access at each of those remote locations through your firewall, that's called an egress point. So with the Fortinet solution, we can support all those egress points with with our firewalls there. The firewall acts as a sniffer, or if you use an application firewall, that also acts as a sniffer as well. We also sell one of those. If you have any questions, just jump in anytime, interrupt me. That's what I'm here for. I'm hoping to address questions or concerns you may have. What you're hoping is your Sandbox will provide, again, that end-to-end security fabric. Which we haven't talked about is the ability to scan file shares. Maybe schedule your Sandbox to go out at your file shares at night, looking in there, because you never really actually purge your file shares. It's a historical data. And one of our customers, the city in Portland, the city of South Portland, that is, told us one of their favorite stories was when they were testing our Sandbox. They found file shares. They found malware in their file shares that was 10 years old from employees that had worked for them for 8 years, and it would just amaze them. They never really thought of it that way, but it's a historical database that you never purge. So they were glad to find that, because one day someone might go back in there and say, "Oh, I need this file," and they open it up and the malware gets released. So we also you also want to make sure that your Sandbox has ICAP, the ability to work with other adapters, other competitive products, so that you can then sometimes integrate with other solutions. And the last thing is you want your Sandbox to be able to do on-demand scanning. The importance for that is if you've done a good job educating your end users on the importance of sending you emails that might look suspicious. Like I'm sure one of you have gotten an email from a friend that said something stupid like, I broke down in Europe, but I need $300 because my car broke down. Chances are you have a credit card. Chances your friend would just call you by a cell phone. But this is the kind of language that hackers put in there, and they get you to click on the link. And so as an IT security, you can then take that file and strip it off the endpoint or the end user's email and send it to the Sandbox for further detonation. So as an IT administrator, you have the privilege rights of doing that. So what they call that on-demand, stripping a file off of an email or whatever and sending it to the Sandbox for further analysis. So the next slide here, this is kind of basically how you get hacked. I'll quickly go through this. This is kind of talking about the break the kill chain of threats. So a bad guy out there somewhere has got your credentials, and he sends you a malicious email, and you hope your anti-spam picks up on it. But if it doesn't, it lands on your desktop, and then you may click on it, and then that click will send a malicious link out to a URL, and you hope your web filtering picks up on it. If it doesn't, the URL gets it. Maybe it sends down some more malware, and you hope your intrusion prevention gets it, but it doesn't. Now they're on your laptop. They may get visibility. They may actually send out more malware, and you hope that your antivirus picks up on it. But if they don't, they look and say, oh, this guy's got some good customer data, or he's got some intellectual property, and they start exfiltrating that data, and you hope your app control or IP reputation on your sandbox, or excuse me, on your firewall gets it. But if it doesn't, these are all what the next generation firewall is looking for. And many times it catches it, but sometimes it doesn't because it's new. It hasn't been figured out yet. It's a 0-day. It's a target attack. It's a polymorphic, and that's where you hope your sandbox picks up on, because the sandbox really acts as your last line of defense. It's got like a 98, 99% detection rate, and really nothing gets by a sandbox. So this is the virus spam VB100 virus spam bulletin. For last year, 2017, you can see here the Fortinet and some of the other competitors up here are at 100% detection rate. So I'm not sure if you folks have any sort of anti-spam solutions out there. Look and see if your current vendor is up here. And if they're not up here, chances are that they perform somewhere down here around 99.4%, which sounds really good, but when you're getting thousands and thousands of emails a day, 99.4% means a lot of spam is getting by. So you want something that has 100% detection rate. As I mentioned before, there's some on-prem solutions out there for Sandbox. There's a lot of cloud solutions for Sandbox. I usually suggest you go with the on-prem solution because you can size it appropriately to be real-time. Also, the problem with cloud solutions is they tend to be siloed. They only do one specific task. They may do a great job at looking at network traffic with a Sandbox, but they're not going to do anything for your endpoint or your mail. Or you may get a solution that can do both network and mail, but they're not going to look at your file share. They're not going to look at your web application firewall. They won't look at east-west traffic. So it's really important to get an end-to-end security fabric solution, unless, of course, you're just looking for a checkbox and you're just trying to satisfy some auditors. So then go with a mail solution in the cloud that does sandboxing, and that will probably get 80 to 90% of the malware that comes through. So anyways, just a little FYI on there. This is the NSS Labs 2017 report on Sandbox. You can see, Fortinet's here in the top 3. Some of our competitors are here. They're pretty close to us. Fortinet is the least expensive out there. FireEye, I used to work at FireEye. I think they have a great product. I'm not sure why they don't do well in the NSS Labs. They did well in 2016, but they haven't done well. They're usually around 80% detection rate. I know when we go head-to-head with them, usually we find that they find it. We've displaced them in a lot of accounts because we proactively block at the mail level. We can automate and update firewalls on the fly. We can quarantine at the endpoint level. So the reason is that we do much more. It's more of an automated solution. As I mentioned before, Fortinet is one of only 2 vendors that publishes their 0-day detection rate. It's us and FireEye, my old company. Cisco, Checkpoint used to publish their 0-day detection rates, but they don't anymore. Fortinet right now is actually at 592. I checked it a week or so ago, so this was back in May of this year. So we've already discovered over 35 0-days this year alone. FireEye in the last 6 years has only discovered 30 0-days. They haven't discovered one yet this year. I checked their website as well. So just FYI, Fortinet's got over 350 engineers in our threat research center taking feeds from our 3.7 million devices. So we take pride in our 0-day detection rate. Yes, quick question. Yes.
Yes. Does NSS Labs publish 0 days?
NSS Labs is just an independent research center. You've heard of like Gartner Magic Quadrant, Forrester Research, NSS Labs, Virus Bulletin, VB100, which is also NSS Labs, VB100. They're just independent research centers. They take boxes, security appliances, and they try to beat them up and break them. Whereas Gartner Magic Quadrant and Forrester, they're more market analysis. Who sells the most product in the market? They might do customer interviews, so they don't really test products. They just kind of base it on, who sells the most, and a lot of those are also subscription services. NSS Labs, VB100, ICS, those are independent places that just try and beat, and they don't actually detect 0 days. They just test solutions against possible 0-day threats or malware that's out there.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. This is Fortinet. You know, we make 37 different products from the ground up. We make a DDoS solution. We have load balancing. You know, we talked about our firewall, Sandbox. This is kind of a quick marketing blurb for Fortinet. Excuse me for that. We have wireless, our AP devices. We also make switches. We have Analyzer Manager, which helps manage our FortiGates. We actually have FortiClient. You know, our client has now it's an AV engine. It's got a VPN capabilities. It can lock in users from going to certain websites. So it's a full endpoint client. It's more of a security fabric agent because it does integrate with our Sandbox. We can actually quarantine on our client. We do integrate with other endpoint solutions such as Carbon Black. We're working with Cylance and CrowdStrike. So Fortinet does integrate with other products. If you're looking at Sandboxes, make sure that they have the ICAP and the ability to integrate with other components. And then SIM. SIM is a product I'm going to talk about right now. What does a SIM do? A SIM is a security incident event management tool. Basically takes logs from all your devices and then correlates that information and then makes determinations if there's something funny going on in your network. Like is Mary, logged into Moscow and she's also logged into Chicago. Maybe you should call Mary's cell phone number. Here's her cell phone number. Figure out where she is and then reestablish her on a new IP address because you have two people or two locations in the globe that are logging in under the same IP address, and that shouldn't be happening. So that's what a SIM does. A SIM looks at unusual activity in your network. It makes reports on it. It sends up alerts. It also looks at performance availability monitoring. So if you have like a SolarWinds, a SIM sometimes can do some of this. It looks at your devices, tells you, hey, you need to put up a new image on this device because he's running on an old rev. WannaCry was basically taking advantage of vulnerabilities in old operating systems. And so if you had some old operating systems in your network that hadn't been updated, WannaCry was able to get in there and make life miserable for you. And that's why it's important to have a performance availability monitoring device that will help and determine that you get some end users out there running on old versions of software, of whatever the software might be. And then also SIM can sometimes do cross-domain analytics and forensic correlation. SIMs also, as I mentioned before, looks at all your physical infrastructure, looks at all your virtual infrastructure, virtual networks, virtual servers, cloud infrastructure, whether it be public, private, or hybrid, your mobility devices, you bring your own device, as well as anything with an IP address. So an Internet of Things. What's an Internet of Things? Anything with an IP address, like a traffic light signal, has an IP address and it produces events. It turns red, green, and yellow every 60, 90 seconds. The video feed in the headrest in front of you on an aircraft, the entertainment system on an aircraft, has an IP address. And you put your credit card, you buy a movie. Sometimes they publish the movies for free, but it has a USB port so you can plug your iPhone in or your Android, maybe to charge it up or to download one of your movies on your headrest in front of you. And our Fortinet has a SIM. We call it FortiSIM, of course. Everything with Fortinet is Forti something. And we monitor all the aircraft in North America through two vendors, Panasonic Aviation and Viasat. And on one particular JetBlue flight, we discovered that a guy was trying to hack into the USB port with his Android on a JetBlue flight. And the FortiSIM sent up alert saying a gentleman on flight 347 bound from JFK to Rochester, New York, and seat 32B has hacked into the USB port. Our suggestion is disconnect the port number such and such, and then contact the authorities in Rochester. Here's the phone number for the Rochester police. So when the plane landed, needless to say that his screen went dark within a few minutes of him trying to do that. And then when he landed, there was 5 police officers ready to apprehend him. And here's why I know this story is true. As one of our partners up in Rochester, when I was telling this story at a lunch and learn, they said, "Oh, I know that guy." I go, "What guy?" "The guy in that JetBlue flight." I go, "You know him?" I go, "Oh, yeah." "How do you know him?" He goes, "Well, he was a security analyst coming to present one of our lunch and learns, and he got apprehended. He came late. He texted us and said, I'll be a little bit late, and he had to talk to the FBI after that." And I go, "So what happened then?" He goes, "Well, he talked his way out of it." I go, "How do you do that?" He goes, "Well, he does risk assessments and pen tests, and he was trying to explain to the authorities that he was trying to prove to JetBlue that they had vulnerabilities in their entertainment system, but lo and behold, his screen went dark and he got apprehended when the plane landed. So whatever they have, that works really well. It was the Fortinet's FortiSIM. But a SIM basically has a supervisor which takes all those logs from all your devices and correlates the data and with some SIMs, you have what we call worker clusters, which allows that to scale out and take the feeds from all your remote locations, which might be considered collectors, which would then feed into the workers. They would process it and then only funnel it up to the supervisors. So, this is some of the things that a SIM has. And the collectors are in your remote location. So if you only have one location, you would only need a supervisor. But if you have remote locations, whether they be local or around the globe, you would need collectors to collect the data and then feed it to your supervisor. Um, and also, you would hope that your SIM would have what we call a fishbone view, which would give you a kind of a single pane of glass, holistic view of your whole network to see what might be infected out there. Obviously, if you see like a red dot like this, you click on it and drill down to figure out what's going on. Maybe someone's logged in 1,000 times and it's because someone's trying to hack into you from overseas, or you see it's the same person. You would call them and say, hey, what's your problem? So that's pretty much it with my presentation. I'm just going to sort of do a wind down. Fortinet, as you may know, was founded in 2000. We IPO'd in 2009. We have $1.5 billion cash in the bank. We are profitable. We've been growing at a rate of about 30% year over year for the last 18 years. We are headquartered in Sunnyvale, California, with over 100 offices worldwide. We have an office in New York. That's our nearest office. We actually have a Boston office that's getting built out right now, so that should be operational in the next few months. We have over 5,000 employees worldwide. When I came on board 4 years ago, I think we had 2,700 employees. So we've almost doubled our size in the last 4 years. We're now at 370,000 customers worldwide. This was, I think, back in January. So we've grown quite a bit. We do have over 3.6 million devices shipped globally. I think it's now up to 3.8 as of the last quarter. We're number one in the world for product appliances shipped. Not number one in the world in revenue, but number one in the world for devices shipped. And I guess I'm going to update this. We're at 590 zero days of tech in the last 12 years. And we've got over 500 patents, 505 patents right now. And this is just 2 of the 4 walls we have at corporate with our U.S. patents on it. And this last slide, this is kind of, the problem with a lot of security is you get a lot of point solutions out there, and you have to manage each point solution individually. Like this one here says network security, and this one down here says identity and access management. And you have cloud security, and mobility security, and messaging security. And the reality is that Fortinet plays in almost all these areas, and all of our solutions integrate with each other. So that's the importance of having a security vendor who goes wide and deep within your security topology. So anyways, that's Fortinet. Any questions, folks? If not, I will give you back 40 minutes of your day. Any questions? I'm here to answer them.
No, I think we're all sorry, all set. As I choke over here.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. And if you'd like a little bit more diverse presentation, if you're looking for something more technical, reach out to the folks at ATEC to have one of our engineers or one of their engineers present to you. And we have live demonstrations that we run every Mondays on SIM every 2 weeks, and we also do it for the Sandbox and Security Fabric Story every other Friday, where we actually show live demos, the integration, some of the reporting, the capabilities of the product. This is kind of more of a high-level discussion about the importance of protecting yourself from end to end. So thanks for your time, and have a great day.
Thanks, David. You too.
Thanks very much.